welcoming you to our webinar entitled Business Process Reengineering, a Key Component of ERP ROI. We'll get into introductions here and get into the webinar in just a second as people are getting settled in on the session here today. That's a bit about me, and we'll talk a bit here in a second about Panorama and who we are as a company. But today's webinar will cover a couple of logistical items. The session is being recorded, so any parts you may miss here today, if you'd like to revisit it in the future or share this presentation with any colleagues that weren't able to join you here today, be happy to feel free to share that information or this recording with people as you see fit. We'll send an email within the next couple of days with follow-up with the link to our website where you can access the on-demand version of today's recording. So if you miss any part or you'd like to share it, feel free to do so. We also encourage any questions you might have during the presentation. You can do so by using the GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen. You'll see a little tab for questions here where you can see spots to submit questions, and only I'll see that, so we'll get to those questions at the end of today's session. You can ask it even in the middle of presenting. I won't see it until the end, and it won't interrupt me, so feel free to submit those questions along the way. We'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end of today's session, so we'll be sure to leave plenty of time to get to the things you want to cover if there's anything we don't cover or anything you'd like to cover in more detail. And if you are on Twitter or social media savvy type of person, feel free to refer to our corporate handle, which is Panorama ERP on Twitter. And you can also use the hashtag BPM if you'd like to engage in the conversation throughout today's presentation. So the agenda of what we'll cover here today, first of all, we'll give a real quick brief introduction to Panorama Consulting. We'll get into the purpose of the webinar, and then talk a little bit about the overall enterprise software and ERP technology project lifecycle. And we'll talk about how business process management fits within that space. Talk a bit about why business process management is important, and then shift gears and talk about a framework and methodology for business process management, and in particular ways that you can use business process management and reengineering to drive benefits realization and a return on investment. So today's conversation, it may, a lot of you may be coming at this topic from a ERP or a enterprise software technology perspective, but really this is kind of a broader discussion beyond technology. It's about how business processes can be used to drive efficiency gains and improvements in your business, and also provide a foundation for those enterprise and ERP technology initiatives that you might be looking to embark on, or perhaps many of you are already embarked on here today. So a bit about Panorama before we get into the meat and the nuts and bolts of today's conversation. Just a bit about Panorama Consulting. We are the world's leading independent ERP consulting firm. So we provide a number of services to our clients. I think the operative terms in our vision of being the world's leading independent ERP consulting firm, one is the fact that we're independent. We're not aligned with any software vendors. We don't sell software. We don't receive any kind of financial kickback or incentive to recommend or sway clients to go a certain direction or not with their software. So 100% technology agnostic, and the principles we talk about here today will be agnostic and will be relevant to you whether you're implementing a large-scale global ERP or like an SAP implementation, or whether you're implementing, kind of a niche-focused PLM solution within your small manufacturing company. So whether you're one extreme or the other, or you're somewhere in between, today's conversation is going to be relevant to any type of enterprise software initiative. The other part about Panorama that's important is that we have a focus on enterprise technology and enterprise processes. So we're the world's leading enterprise consulting firm and ERP consulting firm. So anything to do with enterprise technology, enterprise efficiency gains, business transformations, that's what we focus on, and that's our sweet spot. And the other, I guess, operative term of our vision statement of who we are is the fact that we're global. So most of our clients are global, even the ones that are based here in North America where we're based. Have operations throughout Asia and Latin America and other parts of the world. And we also have our fair share of internationally based clients as well, and we have resources that are based throughout the world as well. So that's a little bit about kind of our vision of being the world's leading independent consulting firm that we've become. Also, our key service offerings run the entire life cycle, soup to nuts, for enterprise technology transformations like ERP initiatives. There's some of the things we provide to our clients during those multiple phases of a project include the overall IT strategy and defining the technological roadmap for 3 to 5 years out, helping clients define what the right path forward is. So that whole IT strategy and enterprise software selection and evaluation, Those are kind of the early stages of projects that we typically help clients with. And then we also help clients with the actual implementation and the actual transformations themselves. So we do quite a bit in the way of project management, organizational change, business process reengineering obviously is a sweet spot of ours given our topic here today of discussion. And also providing functional and technical resources that specialize in the various software solutions in the marketplace. That's another offering we provide. So basically anything to do with implementation, anything to do with enterprise technology and business transformation, that's our sweet spot. That's all we do. We don't try to be everything to everyone. We have a pretty narrow niche that's focused just on those types of initiatives. We also do quite a bit in the way of project recovery, expert witness testimony, which I mentioned before, and a number of other service offerings that are related to our core competency. And then our industry specialties are manufacturing and distribution primarily. That's where most of our clients have been over the years. I think probably 2/3 or more of our revenue comes from manufacturing and distribution, which is obviously a pretty broad, large industry vertical with a number of sub-verticals within that, but that includes everything from food and bev type manufacturers to industrial products, electronics, aerospace and defense, et cetera, medical device, whatever the case may be. In addition to manufacturing and distribution, we do work in a number of other industry verticals, primarily professional and financial services, government, healthcare. Those are some of the main areas that we work in, as well as some other sub-verticals that you see listed there on the slide. And then our team is a global base of industry consultants that have been in the industry for quite some time. There's a typo on the slide that we need to correct. It's not 40-plus years of average industry experience, it's 20-plus. Some of our consultants do have 40 years or more, but the average is more like 20, which is right where I'm at, so that the average consultant has about the level of expertise that I have. And also, we tend to hire people that are more business acumen-minded people. They certainly understand technology and how technology fits into business, but they're more business-driven, and they tend to approach these types of projects more from a business perspective rather than a pure technological perspective. So that's a big part of who we are as well. And then we also have proprietary certifications that we provide to our consultants, a 360-degree ERP certification that we provide all of our consultants, which gives us a level of continuity and consistency that you don't see in other consulting firms. So that all of our consultants are operating from the same playbook and the same methodology and the same tool set. And then finally, our offices are scattered throughout the world. We're able to deploy resources to any organization, any part of the world, any part of North America or any other country for that matter. And our headquarters are in Denver, which is where I'm based. And then some of the broad and deep ERP experience we have, we've worked with over 200 different solutions in helping our clients select and implement those products. You've got SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, et cetera, which kind of your usual suspects of Tier 1 providers. You also have a number of Tier 2 and Tier 3 industry niche focused solutions as well. This is a partial list, doesn't include all 200 solutions that we help clients implement, but hopefully it gives you a flavor of some of the breadth and depth of experience of clients that we've helped select and implement solutions for. And by the way, it's not listed here on the slide, but we have some clients that don't implement any kind of technology or very limited technology. We go through an evaluation and maybe assess business processes and find that maybe now is not the right time for a new ERP system, in which case, there's a different path you can take with process improvements and rolling out process changes and organizational changes to give you some low-hanging fruit. And that's something that a lot of organizations in uncertain global economic times will often resort to, and that's the beauty of hiring someone that's independent, because we, at the end of the day, don't really care which solution you end up implementing, or if you don't implement any kind of solution at all, there's no skin off our back. Our only interest is making sure that our clients implement the solutions that make the most sense for them, whether it involves technology or not. So even though we talk about specific ERP system experience here, we have plenty of case studies or examples with clients where there were no technology implementations. It was more of a straight process and people type of transformation. So that's a bit about Panorama Consulting, who we are and what we do. We'll leave it open for questions at the end of the session if you have other questions about how we can help your organization or questions about how we typically tackle certain projects. But we'll get into the purpose of the webinar, and it's fairly straightforward what we hope you'll all gather or gain from today's session. The first is to understand how BPM fits into overall ERP implementations, and it will also discuss the whole concept of how BPM can be used as a way to enable an overall business transformation that's overarching and provides kind of a framework in which ERP or enterprise technology can be an enabler. We also want to learn how Lean Six Sigma and other business process management best practices can make your enterprise technology implementations more successful. If I had to guess, I would guess that most of you on the phone are probably either seriously considering or have already purchased new enterprise technology that you're trying to implement or trying to roll out across your organization. I'm sure some of you, but maybe a small minority of you, are not looking seriously at technology, in which case the lessons here are still applicable either way. But I think a majority of people are looking at this in the context of how do I fit business process management into, or how do I fit enterprise technology into the overall business process management function. And then finally, we want to debunk common myths and misconceptions about business process management. There's a lot of sales hype and FUD out there that isn't necessarily accurate in terms of real-world practicality. So we want to discuss what some of those common myths and misconceptions are and share what some of the true best practices are in terms of how business process management has been most successful for organizations across the globe. So to start off, just to set the context of what we want to talk about here today, if we look at the overall ERP project lifecycle or any type of enterprise technology lifecycle, you see that up at the top you have in pink and purple there, you have a evaluation and selection process typically, and then you have an implementation process. And obviously that's oversimplifying what is a very complex and painful and costly and risky initiative, but it kind of tells you what the major phases are. And then below in the blue boxes and the orange and green boxes, you see different activities that are major sub-tasks that support those different phases of the project. So you can see a lot there with organizational change, business process management, et cetera. You also see some areas highlighted in orange that are more technically focused, more specific to the software. So things like ERP configuration, looking at reports, data conversion, testing, integration, et cetera. And then you see things in green, which are kind of a hybrid of both the technical and the functional or business activities. But the whole point of this slide is not to talk through each of these points box by box, but just to talk about how when you think of the traditional technology and ERP types of activities that need to happen, those are the things in orange and maybe a little bit of the green. But the things that really make your project successful and consume a majority of your time are going to be those areas highlighted in blue. And all the areas highlighted in blue are things that are related to either business processes and or people. So business process management, business process reengineering, what we're going to talk about here today, is an extremely critical and important part of any successful business transformation or ERP software initiative. So that's a bit about the life cycle and kind of where business process management fits into the life cycle. But let's dive in a little bit more detail and understand why business process management is so important, particularly as it relates to an enterprise software or ERP software initiative. So first point is that technological implementations result in significant changes to a business and its organization. So no matter what type of software you're implementing, no matter how mature or complex or sophisticated or simple your organization is, technology and the changes that go along with that are going to be transformational, and it's going to be a big change for your company. So business process management is a way to identify the process and organizational changes in detail and in specificity, so we understand exactly what those changes are, who's impacted, and kind of how we're going to connect the dots between the as-is and future state. It also highlights organizational change management issues in kind of a gap analysis of here's where we are today, where we're headed, here's who's affected, and here's how they're likely going to respond to that, and here's our strategy for enabling that change. And keep in mind that this isn't as simple as just saying we're just going to train people on these new processes and everything will be good. There's usually a lot more organizational change management support and effort that needs to go into that. And we have a separate webinar and obviously a separate set of service offerings that focus on organizational change, and you're more than welcome to go through our webinars on demand. When you get that email from us within the next day or two with a link to today's recording, you can scroll through and see all of our on-demand recordings. You'll find one that we do on organizational change that talks about that methodology in more detail. And those methodologies are certainly very closely aligned, but for simplicity and time's sake, we split them up into two webinars. But anyway, the purpose is that business process management, or the point is that business process management helps us identify those organizational change management issues. It helps improve the processes based on the needs of the company versus the needs of a software package. So it's kind of like we're making sure that we're not allowing the tail to wag the dog, so to speak. We're letting the business drive the software rather than the software drive the business. And if it were up to ERP vendors, and in particular the people that sell software for the ERP vendors, I think they would like to see the tail wag the dog, because that means more software sale for them. It means more licensees, more revenue, more commission and whatnot. But at the end of the day, your business processes should really be determining what type of technology you use, how you use it, how you configure the software, and God forbid you need to customize the software. That's not a terrible thing all the time. Sometimes you need to customize the software in the spirit of letting your business processes drive your overall business. So that's the overall, kind of view of that. Is that business process management helps you find the right software, it helps you estimate the cost more effectively. It also helps you identify KPIs to measure performance and projected cost savings throughout the initiative. It's also true that business process management is mandatory for ERP implementations. A lot of times companies think, well, we don't really need to go through that whole reengineering thing, or we don't need to spend a whole lot of time mapping our processes because the new software is going to tell us how things are done. We're just going to use the software out of the box, and why bother? And that's a pretty misguided approach or philosophy, although I understand why people think that way, because a lot of software vendors do sell that way. They think, they'll try it in the interest of getting a deal done sooner. They'll say, hey, don't worry about your processes, don't worry about mapping it, just use our software out of the box. That's going to transform your business, so sign on the dotted line. So that's not the best approach, though. If you want your project to succeed, you really do need business process management as an important work stream and component of your overall ERP initiative and business transformation initiative. In particular, it reduces risk to the project because it ensures that the processes are driving the software rather than the other way around. It also ensures that it's not on the slide, but one thing that comes to mind is that you're also making sure that you're not having expensive technical consultants on the meter with the clock running, making decisions around how you should be running your business. Those decisions have already been made, and the technical consultants have a clear roadmap or blueprint for how they need to configure or customize the software to fit those needs. Focusing on BPM also increases the ROI and identifies other cost savings opportunities. So you're typically going to be finding ways to save money and or increase top-line revenue growth as a result of these new systems, and that allows you to focus your efforts throughout the implementation on things that are adding the most value. So it's going to ensure that you implement in a way that's delivering value, delivering cost reductions, process cycle time improvements, increased revenue, all that good stuff that we all expect and hope to see from our ERP and business transformation initiatives. We also ensure that key differentiating business processes and logic are not lost during implementation. So when you look at companies and their unique competitive advantages, and I'm not talking about, I don't want to confuse competitive advantage with a refusal to change, because sometimes there's just a simple refusal to change. We don't want to change because our old green screen system has always done it this way, and we like having our part numbering schema work the way it has been just because we're comfortable with it. That may not be a competitive differentiator, the way you number your parts. But when you look at things like how you service your customers, or how you develop or design your products, and that makes them unique, those are the things that are going to be differentiators for you as a company. You want to focus on those things that allow you to maintain and enhance those competitive advantages. And in some cases, that may mean that off-the-shelf software isn't going to support you. It may mean that you need some kind of customization or some kind of bolt-on system, or maybe some kind of manual process that you intentionally want to keep, just because it does enable and protect that competitive advantage. And then the process management also supports the documentation and standardization of processes, including process training, traceability of process changes throughout up and downstream from your workflows, and also continuous process improvement opportunities. So that's a bit about why process management is so important. And I could spend an hour just talking about why it's important, but I'd say in lieu of me doing that and spending another hour on that topic, I'd encourage you to go to our website and download our 2016 ERP report. If you go to that report, you'll see a lot of interesting metrics that talk about the various challenges that companies have had when they've recently implemented ERP systems, and it's very quantitative analysis of recent implementations. We each year study about 200 plus different organizations that have recently implemented enterprise technology, and we ask them candid, quantifiable questions about how much they spent, how long it took, what pain points they had along the way, what kind of benefits they realized, all that good stuff. So that if you read that report, a lot of it points back to business process management. We don't have time to go through all that today, but I encourage you to download that report if you still aren't convinced that business process management is important for your initiative. Although I suspect most of you probably do think it's important, otherwise you wouldn't be on this webinar here today. So now we'll kind of shift gears and talk about benefit realization, return on investment, and how that all ties in with business process management. Now, I talked just a moment ago about how business process management can enable you to preserve your competitive advantage and some of the things that make you unique. And we show this slide here when we educate our clients and our executives within our clients on ERP initiatives. We show the slide to show that, not all business functions and business processes are created equally. If I'm an employee within the company, I might disagree with that because that's my world. But if I back up and look at the 20,000-foot view of us as an organization, and I look at the things that are more important, or the most important to us, and what makes us unique, and what makes us different, what makes our customers love us, and what makes our customers want to spend more money with us, generally there's just a handful of areas that directly relates to, and those are the areas you want to focus your time and effort on. And those are the areas that you want to assume that you're not necessarily just going to get something out of the box, off the shelf, to tell you how to run your business. You're going to have to do some real heavy lifting to define those processes and make sure you find the right technological solution to enable those processes. So when you look at the base of the pyramid of kind of, what can we use off the shelf, out of the box, using industry pre-configured best practices, generally it's the basic functionality, kind of the core traditional ERP types of functions like accounting, finance, GL, basic inventory management. Those types of things are going to be kind of boilerplate standard processes for any company, regardless of what industry you're in or how big you are or whatever. And most ERP systems in the marketplace are probably going to be able to handle those functions pretty well. I mean, every system has its different nuances and strengths or whatnot, but for the most part, they can handle those core ERP functions. But as you move up this pyramid of competitive advantage, we call it, you kind of move up to your industry differentiators, and then you move up even further to your sources of competitive advantage. As you move up that pyramid, it becomes less and less common, or less and less likely that you're going to be able to leverage best practices and pre-configured solutions that will allow an off-the-shelf software to just kind of drive the process for you. And in fact, as you move up the pyramid, the inverse becomes true. Your processes end up driving more of the technology rather than the technology driving the software. So if you kind of differentiate your processes, although it's never this black and white, but to the extent that you can differentiate your functions and processes into the top of the pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid, and then maybe some that are somewhere in between, that's going to give you a little bit of a roadmap, or at least some direction on which processes should you spend more time mapping and re-engineering up front versus those that you might want to back off a little bit, just do some light mapping and re-engineering and let the software drive, which would be the bottom of your pyramid. And then the earlier stuff I talked about, your sources of competitive advantage, you'll want to spend more time on those, mapping those out and letting those processes drive the technology rather than the other way around. And the last thing I'll note here is as you move up the pyramid, although that's the area where most companies get the real ROI from technological and business transformation initiatives, that's also the source of higher degree of unpredictability and risk in a project in terms of it taking longer than expected and costing more than expected. And it also leads to more implementation, complexity, time, and cost. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to be ready for it and make sure that you've accurately and realistically budgeted time and money and resources for what it's going to take to address both the top and the bottom of the pyramid. Because a lot of times what traditional ERP consultants will do, they'll assume that all of your business processes are kind of at the bottom of the pyramid. They're just going to be vanilla off-the-shelf type processes, and they can implement in 6 months or 9 months or whatever number they tell you for X amount of money or whatever number they tell you. But the reality is you've got that upper part of the pyramid you've got to deal with, and that's going to add to your cost and complexity and time, but it's also going to deliver a higher level of ROI and value than the bottom of the pyramid. So hopefully that helps differentiate between the different types of business processes and how software-specific best practices fit into that pyramid. So when you look at the overall business process management approach that Panorama takes, it's very similar to a Six Sigma approach. If any of you are Six Sigma certified or have seen Six Sigma materials, it follows that DMAIC type of approach, the define, measure, analyze, improve, and continuously improve, or control, monitor. So you can see that we follow a very similar methodology that focuses on first defining and measuring processes, then analyzing, then improving, then controlling and monitoring, managing. And then you'll see at the top right in pink is the automation part. That's where the software gets overlaid to to automate some of those processes. And generally, the more successful companies we've worked with and the most effective companies we work with take this kind of approach, where they take the process first approach to kind of a Six Sigma approach, and then they overlay technology on that that'll best support that, or perhaps multiple technologies. And then you'll see at the bottom, organizational change and benefits realization is a thread that runs throughout that whole business process management work stream. And then more specifically within business process mapping, you have, or within business process management, you have a first step, or kind of a first iteration of process management, which is the process mapping. And that's generally where you're starting with your as-is, looking at how are things working right now, what are the things that are working well, and what are the pain points and opportunities for improvement within our current context. And it also gives people a kind of a foundation or a grounding. It gets people grounded because everyone, for better or for worse, whether we like our current processes or not, we're grounded in it because we do it every day. We understand it. We understand where the things that are working well. We understand where the bodies are buried. We kind of get it from that perspective. So we always start with the current process, or we typically start with the current process and understanding that and mapping that out to some degree. We don't go into the transactional levels of detail or anything, but we just talk more generally about how processes flow, who does what, how information is passed off back and forth between departments and functions and whatnot. So that generally gives you a good starting point. And then at the bottom left, you can see some of the methodologies and specific tools that we use at Panorama to help facilitate this whole business process mapping session. Everything from the workshop guides to help jumpstart the conversation to the benchmark assessments and the overall workshops and process maps and whatnot. And then when we talk about process mapping, and this actually applies to improvement and reengineering as well, when you talk about more extensive process work or deeper dive process work, you generally are looking at your business processes in different levels of detail. You're looking at kind of your level 1 macro processes that you start with, and you just define your high-level processes, and then you get down to level 2, where you start to get into more detailed and sub-processes and sub-processes. And generally, as you get down to level 2, that's where you're starting to bump up against needing to know what specific technology we might be using to support the process. But generally, you're still doing the same things. The only question mark, or the only thing open for discussion, is what software are we going to use, and what specific menus are we going to use, and what buttons are we going to click to make those processes happen. But in general, if you go down to that third dotted line at the bottom of level 2, generally you're looking at that from a technology agnostic view. You're looking at reengineering or redefining, mapping out your processes in a way that's technology agnostic, independent of technology. This is how you run your business, regardless of whether you're using a world-class ERP system or whether you're using paper and pencil or Excel spreadsheets or whatever. But then when you get down to blueprinting, the boxes in yellow, that's where you get much more specific into here's exactly how we do it within the context of the software. Here are the buttons we click, here's the menus we click, etc. And that's where, certainly when you get down to that level of detail, you're getting into kind of a third iteration of process management. So the reason we show this is because a lot of people think, well, why even bother starting our process mapping until we pick the software? Well, the reason why is because you need to do that level 1 and level 2 level of detail if you want to truly let your processes drive the project and be the foundation for the project, and if you want to save money when you go to implement the software. Because if you're spending your time trying to figure out all the answers to level 1 and level 2 while you got 3, 5, 10, or however many functional and technical consultants on the clock with a meter running, that's going to turn into a very expensive project. So it'll save you a lot of time and money by taking that time up front to define the level 1, level 2. And then when your consultants come in, the technical and functional consultants, they usually will start with that level 1, level 2 as a foundation, and they can focus their efforts on defining level 3 in a way that supports those top 2 levels of business process. And then when we look at business process mapping, the question becomes, well, what are we mapping? Are we mapping our as-is? Are we mapping our future state? Are we starting with a clean slate and just completely overhauling our processes? And the consultant answer to that would be it depends. I mean, it depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish as an organization. I would say that most companies we work with don't ask us to come in and just map out the current processes and leave it at that. We might use that as a starting point, but we're ultimately trying to get somewhere beyond the as-is to at the very least, an incremental improvement, which would be the area on the left where you're talking about incremental process improvements that focus on improving processes, removing waste. The next level would be the middle, which is business process optimization, which is where you're really trying to fine-tune your processes and take that extra effort to really take more of a quantum leap in terms of how your processes change or evolve. And then the more extreme example is in purple, which is one step further, which is you're just completely re-engineering your processes. You're going through radical change. You're starting over from scratch in a lot of ways. It's pretty rare that we see clients on either extreme. In fact, the one extreme of just looking your as is, we don't even list on the slide because most clients, I can't remember the last client that asked us to come in and just look at as is. The ones in purple, that does happen occasionally. The radical process reengineering, that does happen occasionally with clients. But typically, even if they think they want reengineering, they realize how hard that is and how they have to kind of start more over on the left and kind of work their way over to the right. So most of our clients end up landing somewhere in either the blue or the green, either the improvement or the optimization, just depending on how mature their processes are and how much opportunity for improvement there is. For clients that are pretty well fine-tuned, they might just ask us to come in and improve and do some incremental changes. For other companies, they might say, look, we've been on the same system for 25 years. We haven't changed our processes in 25 years. Let's do more of a optimization. And then on the extreme side, you get some companies that have just patched together a number of business units and acquisitions, and they decide, look, there's no as is or doing incremental improvements because it's such a mess. We want to completely overhaul and start from scratch. And so there are cases where we do that, although that's a lot less common. So that's business process mapping. Now, kind of that previous slide kind of jumps the gun a little bit and talks here about business process improvement, and then the next slide talks about optimization. So I won't spend a lot of time here, but hopefully you get the idea that optimization now is looking at process mapping, taking it one step further now, and jumping into those incremental improvements to key processes. Typically, clients here will say, hey, just don't focus on process improvements across the board, but focus on these 5, 6, 7 areas that are critical to our business. The other areas, can be okay as is, or perhaps overlaying some technology on those other areas will be enough. That'll suffice. But we're really going to get the low-hanging fruit here is going to be focusing on the big meaty stuff that's important to our business. And same with business process optimization. That's where you're not only looking at more processes, you're looking at all of your business processes, but you're taking it a step further now. You're looking at how can we optimize the business in every nook and cranny of the business, and how can we really fine-tune those processes to give us an even stronger foundation for providing next steps to a potential ERP or enterprise software implementation initiatives. And then finally, you have your continuous process improvement, which is kind of after the fact, after you've done either your process mapping and or your process improvement and optimization. You'll then get into continuous improvement, and that's where you look at, how can we really fine-tune our processes? How can we make sure that our processes continue to evolve and that our technologies that we're using continue to stay aligned with those business processes? So it's really kind of getting into that more of the center of excellence / continuous improvement type of mentality within your organization, where you're being more proactive so that hopefully you don't run into the same problem 10 or 20 years down the road where you need to go out and hire some consultants because your processes and your technologies are such a mess because you haven't touched them in 20 years that now you need someone to come fix it for you. So the idea when we leave a client is that we've made you self-sufficient. We left you with kind of a center of excellence and a mentality of continuous improvement to where you can be self-sufficient going forward and hopefully not call us for 10 or 20 years and obviously wait until you need some kind of new technology or other business transformation before you call us without having to rely on consultants for continuously improving your business along the way. And then if you look at the overall business process management, it's important to note that it's an iterative process. You start with your current state on the left, you get to your future state on the right, but there's a lot of steps in between. You start with, generally during an evaluation and selection stage, you might be looking at your general requirements and your process maps. But then when you get into the next steps of your project, you'll start to look at process improvements and optimization. And then when you get into system blueprint, that's where you get into more detail, defining your test cases and whatnot. During actual implementation, that's where the processes become transactionally real. They're actually there. They're available for people to use. But even that's not truly getting to your future state until you go to that last step, which is making sure that people within the organization understand how those processes should work and how the system works. Not just transactional training, but just understanding how the business processes should flow and roles and responsibilities within the company and whatnot. So when you look at process improvement and what people can expect to see, it's a lot like an ERP implementation. You see kind of an initial drop in productivity right after the changes, but then ultimately over time, if you've done it right, you'll see that performance increase to a greater level than what you had before. So it's kind of, you've got to take that short-term pain to get to that longer-term gain. And the key is how do we minimize that short-term pain and how can we maximize that long-term gain? And that's really, a lot of that's done through organizational change management. So One thing to note about business process management is that without organizational change management coinciding with process management, you're going to see deeper valleys and slower recoveries on the right side of this chart. So you have to ask yourself, how important is that to us, and how quickly do we want to recover, and how much do we want to maximize the return on investment that we're making in this overall enterprise technology, ERP, or business transformation. So I just stole my own thunder here, but change management enables your BPM initiative. It's the things like the organizational impact assessment, the customized and process-based training materials, targeted employee communication, implementation of policy and procedure changes prior to the implementation of the new system. There's a lot of times where we go through this exercise of this process management with clients prior to an ERP or enterprise initiative, and you find that there's a lot of process improvements we can start making now. We can immediately roll those out, get some immediate improvement and efficiency gains without necessarily having to wait for a new technology to get rolled out. Now, certainly when the new technology gets rolled out, it might further enhance or enable that process, but there's a lot you can do without the technology that can enable you to have that happen. And one example is a real simple, basic example would be, let's just say that you're not a publicly traded company, so you don't need to be SOX compliant, Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. But let's just say you've got some internal control issues as a result of that with purchase order approvals, and you want a new ERP system that helps enable some better approval processes and internal control, segregation of duties, etc. Well, an ERP system is going to make that a lot easier to accomplish those things. But you can also start instituting policy and procedure changes right now that's going to enable those controls through multi-tier approval processes. Maybe it's through email, or maybe it's through if you've got an internal database you use, or SharePoint or something, you can use some workflows to kind of get a real simple Band-Aid solution in place. But a lot of times that gives you some immediate lift because it gives you the benefit of the process change, but it also spoon feeds the changes to the employees so that they're not stuck with a bunch of changes all at once on day one of go live. Instead, you've slowly phased in some of these changes over time, rather than waiting until you pick a technology, then you implement it, then you're forcing thousands of changes on employees across the company all at once, which is usually messy. So there's a lot of benefit and merit to that last bullet, which is focused